Picture this. It's 6:47 in the morning. The alarm goes off, not once, not twice, but on the third snooze. And there's this man lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. He's not depressed. He's not lazy. He's just still. For about 90 seconds, he exists in this strange limbo between the life he's living and the life he imagined he would have. Then he gets up. He showers. He makes coffee. He drives to work. And he does it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every single weekday for the next 30 years. Now, here's the question most people get completely wrong about this man. They look at him and they think he's just going through the motions. They assume there's nothing psychologically interesting happening inside someone who clocks in at 9 and clocks out at 5. They think routine is the enemy of depth. But what if I told you the opposite is true? What if the 9-to-5 man is one of the most psychologically complex figures of modern life, and that most of what's happening inside him is invisible, even to himself? Let's talk about what's really going on. The first thing you need to understand is something psychologists call identity foreclosure. It's a term from Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, and it basically describes what happens when a person settles into a role not because they consciously chose it, but because life presented it and they stepped into it without fully questioning whether it fit. A lot of 9-to-5 men didn't sit down at 22 and say, "You know what I want? A cubicle and a pension plan." Life just sort of moved in that direction. A bill appeared, a relationship deepened, a father got sick, and one morning the alarm went off and the choice had already been made without feeling like a choice at all. This isn't weakness. This is extraordinarily human, because even when a man didn't choose his path consciously, his brain starts to defend it as if he did. Cognitive dissonance theory, first articulated by Leon Festinger back in 1957, tells us that the mind cannot tolerate the gap between "I am doing this" and "I don't believe in this." So the brain, quietly, automatically, works overtime to close that gap, to find meaning, to construct narrative, to make the routine feel not just acceptable, but right. That's why, if you ask most 9-to-5 men why they work, they won't say, "I was afraid." They'll say, "I do it for my family." And here's the thing, they mean it, completely, sincerely. The psychology has done its job. The story is real now. The love is real. The sacrifice is real. But somewhere underneath that, there's often a quieter, more complicated truth that doesn't get much airtime. Think about this. Studies on what's called the Sunday scaries, that wave of low-grade dread that rolls in on Sunday evenings, show that it affects somewhere between 80 and 90% of working adults. 80 to 90%. That's not a personal failing. That's a collective psychological experience. What your brain is doing in that moment is something researchers call anticipatory stress. It's not reacting to what's happening now. It's pre-suffering the week ahead. And the reason it does this is because the 9-to-5 structure, at its core, is a permanent negotiation between freedom and security. Your brain never fully resolves that negotiation. It just keeps running the calculation, every Sunday, forever. But here's where I want to take you somewhere deeper. Because this story isn't just about stress. It's about identity. It's about what happens to a man's sense of self when 40 hours a week, that's nearly a quarter of his entire waking life, is structured by someone else's schedule. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control, developed by Julian Rotter in the 1950s. People with an internal locus of control believe that their outcomes are shaped by their own actions. People with an external locus of control feel like their life is being steered by outside forces, bosses, systems, economic pressure, luck. And here's what's heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time. The 9-to-5 structure, by its very nature, nudges men toward the external end of that dial. Not because they're weak, because the system is designed that way. Clock in, follow process, get evaluated, repeat. It's a machine, and you are one of its moving parts.
Over time, something subtle happens. A man stops asking, "What do I want?" and starts asking, "What do they need?" And the distance between those two questions is where a lot of quiet suffering lives. It shows up not as a breakdown, but as flatness, a kind of emotional muting. He's fine, but he's not alive. He's functioning, but he's not felt. Psychologist Martin Seligman would recognize this as the early signature of what he called learned helplessness. Not full despair, but a slow erosion of the belief that your actions meaningfully change your circumstances.
When every Monday looks like every other Monday, the brain starts to treat effort as optional because the outcome feels predetermined anyway. And yet, and this is the part that gets me, the same man will come home and be genuinely funny with his kids. He will have opinions about football that he will defend like a philosopher. He will fix the leak under the sink on Saturday morning with a competence that borders on artistry, because the self doesn't disappear inside a routine. It finds cracks. It sneaks through. It expresses itself in the margins. That's the psychological miracle of the 9-to-5 man that nobody talks about. The sheer act of maintenance. Not glamour, not legacy, just the studied, unglamorous act of holding things together. And there is enormous psychological dignity in that, even when it doesn't feel like it from the inside. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and built an entire branch of psychology around the question of meaning, said something that I think speaks directly to this man's life. He said that meaning can be found not just in great achievements, but in the attitude we take towards suffering we cannot avoid. In other words, it's not always about escaping the structure. Sometimes it's about what you bring to it. Now, I'm not saying the 9-to-5 is ideal. I'm not saying don't chase your dreams. I'm saying that the psychology of the man inside it is richer, more layered, and more worthy of curiosity than our culture gives it credit for. We celebrate the entrepreneur who quit his job. We rarely stop to examine the quiet courage of the man who stayed, who kept showing up, who bore the weight without making a scene, who defined his worth through reliability rather than disruption. If you're that man, or you love that man, I want you to sit with this for a second. The numbness you feel on Monday morning is not a character flaw. The exhaustion at 5 p.m. is not weakness. The dreams you've quietly filed away are not dead. They're compressed. And compression is not the same as surrender. The most interesting work in psychology right now is happening around something called post-ecstatic meaning. The idea that profound personal growth doesn't always come from peak experiences or dramatic pivots. Sometimes it comes from the slow, deliberate examination of an ordinary life. From asking in the middle of the routine, what is this actually for? And am I living it on purpose? That question, that one right there, is where the real psychology lives. So the next time you or someone you know rolls out of bed at 6:47, stares at the ceiling for 90 seconds and gets up anyway, don't call it a default. Call it what it is, a choice. Made quietly, remade every morning, and carrying more psychological weight than most people will ever understand. If this hit different, or if you saw someone you know in this script, drop a comment below. Tell me who you were thinking about. And if you're interested in the deeper psychology of how men build identity, manage pressure, and find meaning in modern life, subscribe, because that's exactly the kind of conversation we're going to keep having here.